This is The Difference Makers, a Paladin security podcast. Each week, we take you inside the world of security for a first-hand look at the inner workings of the industry. But it's about more than just protecting property and manning events. It's about going above and beyond to make the world a safer and friendlier place.
Welcome to The Difference Makers. I'm Christina Haydanis with Paladin Security. This month, Damian Radcliffe, Director of Operations in Edmonton, explains why empathy in security is crucial and shares a very personal story about why it's so important to him. He also touches on how to lead in uncertain times and why it's more prevalent now than ever. So, Damian, you have a very interesting history. Tell me a little bit about your background and what led you to Paladin Security.
Well, I joined the military in 1999, and a couple of years into that, September 11th happened. I kind of kicked off a pretty wild career. I ended up doing 2 tours to Bosnia, one doing anti-human trafficking, next one doing kind of patrol work and force protection stuff.
Wow.
And then got into the explosives and the kind of the bomb side of things, and did another tour doing anti-piracy in the Gulf of Aden and that area of the world. And then as my career moved on, kind of moved up the ranks, got into investigations, things like that. I investigated aircraft incidents and weapons-related incidents and accidents. Then decided it was time to leave. I started my family, things like that. So it was time for me to leave. So left, started my own company, and ran that for 6 years or so. We kind of specialized in close protection and event security. Sold it, and then ended up working with one of our clients now in the property management world for 3 years. And that was a really good learning experience and a good kind of stepping stone. And then found my way into Paladin in a previous role, and then took the branch over last year. So wow. It's kind of a 20 years in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good summary of it all. So it sounds like a lot of what you learned in the military has led you to be prepared for a career in security. But how have you blended those two careers?
So you learn a lot of like the leadership stuff. So there's some things that I learned in the military that were easier to transition than others. The leadership principles, things like that. A lot of that stuff was pretty easy to blend. I found the harder part to blend in was the business of security, the business side. And that's when I went back to school and I went and got my certificate in specifically in security management. And to kind of get that, and then pursued my designation through ASIS with getting my CPP done to sort of fill those gaps in some of that educational piece. And then, as with many things in life and in this industry, it was sort of trial by fire, just learning as you do things and learning on the fly. And running my own company was a really excellent kind of way to learn, because our industry is so broad. And there's so many different things you can do. And when you're running your own place, you can take a job that maybe doesn't make a ton of money, but it's an interesting evolution and experience to go through.
Right. So,
I was very blessed to be part of, doing close protection for international delegations and celebrities, and then, running major events that had 27 to 35,000 people at them for short periods of time, and all the logistics that go into that. Yeah. The recruiting and all those kinds of things, because you kind of have to do a little bit of everything. So that part was a really good learning curve and learning experience.
Yeah.
And that kind of blended in well with my background. I've been doing this trade in some fashion since I was 21 years old.
Right.
And it's been a long process, but an interesting process. And I do find that though, like I said, my military experience did prepare me a lot for this industry. It's not necessarily specific to this industry, though. So some of the principles are similar, they're the same, but you're dealing with very different conditions. there's a lot of things in military operations you have to deal with. There's the prevailing political things like that. It's not really something that as a soldier you have to deal with, but in the security industry you do.
Well, and I want to touch on some of those in a second, but I want to first ask, as a leader, do you find that you kind of lead your team in a military type way? Like I've heard this is common, in some of our other areas, with Pal American and stuff like that. Like if they have military backgrounds, they kind of like to have, roll call kind of thing and check uniforms and that type of thing. What kind of things do you bring in as a leader that might be similar to what it was like in the military?
So some of the stuff with the military, the military leadership style, definitely doesn't work on the civilian side. So there was no way for some of that to translate. Mm-hmm. But I would say the stuff that I brought in is, I believe heavily in camaraderie and actually caring for one another, making sure that we understand this is a difficult industry and we need to kind of be there for each other, and sort of having that unit feel to what we do, so that we have that support structure in place for each other. And the other thing I'm big on is organizational structure. And that is, I would say that's one of the, probably the most prevalent function that I've brought across in leadership, is having well-defined roles and well-defined career paths and chain of command. And that's so that people kind of know that if they're brand new, that they kind of have an idea, if they want to be Damian one day, what that path kind of looks like. Mm-hmm. And we've done a lot of work in this branch over the last year to develop those career paths and put some of that information out, and try and engage not just the office staff, but all of our staff through, the videos that I've been doing, stuff like that, to try and get some of the message out that, we're here to support. We want to try and help. We're in this together. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with things now that 10 years ago were pretty much unfathomable. Mm-hmm. When I joined the industry, some of the discussions we're having today weren't even on the radar and couldn't have been foreseen. So it's important that we kind of stick together on that. And I think those are the principles of military I bring to my leadership style here. I've never been a dictatorial type leader, which is right. Kind of the classic stereotypical sort of military leadership style. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's productive, and because our workforce has a large percentage of workforce has a very different outlook on the world. We have to be better at explaining the why behind what we do, and helping people understand that they're part of this, and there are people involved in the change, and trying to push things forward as a company.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned was the videos, and so I want to touch on that. I really enjoyed one that you did called Empathy-Led Security, but before we dive into that one, it's a way for you to connect with your employees. So why is that so important to you?
Well, I think one of the challenges that corporations have is that a lot of corporations have gotten into sort of traditional style of talking to our staff and communicating to our staff via email, memo, those types of things, which I would say have a real low engagement level. And also it doesn't give that, the written word doesn't give the same impact as seeing somebody and understanding the passion behind certain things and seeing those real human reactions. Right. And ultimately a large percentage of our workforce, that's how they interact. That's how they, get their news and things like that. And I wanted to sort of increase the likelihood that we could get the message out to a greater number of our people, mm-hmm. because it's important to me that they understand my vision. We're in a pandemic, and all of the traditional ways of dealing with getting vision out and leadership through, whether it be meetings, town halls, drop-bys, things like that, some of the stuff is just not available. Yeah. So I wanted to find some way that I could meaningfully connect with staff and have a place where they can comment and, reward them for participating, mm-hmm. and getting engaged with what we're trying to do in the direction we're trying to go in.
For sure. And as I mentioned, the empathy-led security one, I really enjoyed. So You kind of explained why empathy is such a crucial thing to have in the industry. You gave a personal example as well. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
No, it's fine. I often joke the reason I made the video is because it can be difficult to talk about. So at least sometimes the video you can cut in and out. So that part is good. But ultimately, my dad left when I was a very young person. I was, I think, 13 or 14 when he left. And I didn't see him again for 7 or 8 years. And I ran into him in a Walmart in Clairview, which is a neighborhood here in Edmonton, looking for an oil filter. And ran into my dad, my estranged father, for like 7 years. So kind of had to make this decision as a young guy to try and, like, what do I do here? Like, I'm angry, but he's still my dad. I miss him and all those things. So what do I do? So in that kind of second, I decided to open up the conversation, and we kind of exchanged some information and chatted. He didn't really have a stable means of communication. So often, we, kind of was on and off. But once we did reconnect and get going on that, we had like 20 years together. That was awesome. A lot of fun. And it was really cool to kind of see, to get to know him, because I didn't know him at all. Because when you're 14, dads are still doing dad stuff and you don't really get to know them as a person. So I really got an opportunity to get to know him and see kind of, understand some of the things about me, for better or for worse, some of the good and bad and where it comes from. And, we share a sense of humor. He was a really funny guy. He passed a few years back and I was his primary caregiver for the last 3 years of his life.
Wow.
And that part was challenging. And I'm glad he didn't have to go through that alone, which foreseeably he may have had to, given the choices he made. And also found out that period of time that he was homeless for quite a period of time.
Wow.
And the challenges that he had with being homeless and, living in the marginalized lifestyle, where kind of kicked around from place to place, couch surfing with relatives, trying to find employment with limited education, limited experience, and all the things that he had, and no money, because it ultimately costs money to get employed a lot of times. So that kind of changed my outlook on a lot of things. I think, especially when it comes to people who are homeless, or people who are suffering from the side effects of mental health or addictions issues. My dad was suffering from mental health issues, undiagnosed, didn't have the tools or upbringing or family support to recognize it, and didn't have the resources to get help, and ended up affecting his entire life. And it changed me as a person, and made it really important to me that we treat people fairly. It's regardless of what they look like and what their background is, or some of the things that go on. We interact with my staff here in Edmonton, interact with foreseeably, thousands of people a day.
Yeah.
And how much can that interaction change somebody? How much can interaction change the perception of what we do and what we represent? And that's, I think, never been more important than now. Is society is demanding a different approach to how not just security works, but law enforcement works, and our justice system, and a lot of the things. There's a major call for a different way of doing business. And as a main feeder for law enforcement agencies and public safety, I think that we have a really good opportunity to kind of grow a tree that's supplying fresh apples with a different look to those organizations that can definitely have an impact in the future. All that kind of stems from that experience of going through that with my father, and hearing about being kicked around by law enforcement and kicked around by security agents, and shuffled off to the side of health systems and all of those things.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers the question.
No, it does. Thank you for sharing that story. It sounds like it taught you so much. Was it tough to be able to put yourself out there and share that with your staff, and what was the reaction to it?
So interestingly, so when we started down the path of these videos, that one wasn't even on the radar.
Oh.
That came out of a conversation that I had with the group I was working with to get um, the videos out. So we had some of the more generic, very typical sort of leadership ones, which, the dress and deportment ones, and some of those ones were pre-scripted. And that kind of came out of a conversation because the question came up is like, why are you so passionate about trying to change how approaches are done and how we track approaches and how we do those things? And I kind of told that story, and the gentleman that was working with me on that kind of said, you have to tell that story.
Yeah.
And to your point, my first reaction was, nope.
It's tough.
Yeah, no, and I don't want to.
Yeah.
And I think there was some shame around it for a long time. And I will say it was kind of a therapeutic / cathartic type experience to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And of all the videos that got released, that one was the toughest one to approve to go, because it was just so terrifying for me.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from a background where you don't talk about stuff like that.
No.
I came from a background where leadership principles sort of dictated that you had to appear impervious to just about anything all the time. So that experience was really hard. It was very, very hard. I can't even watch the video now because it's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I share it with people for them to watch. And actually, we were doing an RFP presentation
Mm-hmm.
on it, and they wanted the group we were presenting to wanted to see the video. The video failed to load, so I had to tell the story
Oh
to
no.
them, and it was tough. It was tough to get through. It's not an easy thing to discuss. I think I still struggle with it a little bit, because it was a painful part of my past, and it was challenging to be a young man without guidance from my father, and having to learn to fix and do all kinds of stuff on my own. And thank God I had an amazing mom who really went out of her way I never wanted for anything, but there's just some things that was more challenging not having that father figure there for me.
Yeah.
So to share that was tough.
Well, I saw some of the feedback, and tell me a little bit about the feedback that you got. Like, some people, I know it was very powerful to watch, and I know a lot of people really connected with it. So what kind of feedback did you receive from that?
Well, I think that interesting that a lot of the feedback was that there was so many people who could relate. Mm. I had a lot of people reach out saying, I had a similar experience. I grew up without a dad, and we're without a parent, one or the other. Mm-hmm. And I struggled with it, and, thank you for sharing. We really appreciate it. And sort of giving, not that it was up to the point of the exercise, but sort of finding it, inspiring or whatever the case is, which is still an awkward thing for me to go through. But it was, there was eventually even an article written about it for Father's Day in one of the magazines that we work with. And, while that's all good, it was, it's weird to think that, a year ago I was hesitant to share this story. Now it's still awkward and difficult, but to think that maybe it went some way, it seems to have gone some way to help people feel a little less weird about their upbringing.
Yeah.
Because I know for years I always felt weird about it. Like, you missed something, or, when I got married, it was challenging because I didn't have anyone to model how to be a husband. Mm-hmm. No idea. So figuring that on your own, with the skills you may have missed. So some of that stuff was tough, but I found the feedback was really encouraging, and it did help fill me up a little bit to kind of get over that. I find that the shame part kind of goes away.
Right.
or is going away, with the fact that there are so many people who share that type of adversity in their life, and the fact that somebody kind of reaching out and saying, "Yeah, I know, kind of know where you're coming from. It's tough."
Yeah.
Seemed to help people, and I think that, like I said, though, it was an opportunity for me to connect with my staff.
Mm-hmm.
I find that the impact's been a little bit further than that, and led to some great conversations. Some of the staff wanted to meet with me after that, so had some meetings with them just to talk and talk about career stuff and about things like that. So it's had a really positive consequence on me as a person to kind of help deal with these things. And I think as you go through these things, I think that's part of the challenges. We often think that we have to deal with these things alone or hide them, sort of not share those types of things. But I found that through this process, it's been a really helpful kind of part of my healing and moving through this.
Mm-hmm. And it's also taught the officers a lot about empathy too, which is something that Paladin does train our officers or guards for. So why is it such a big part of security?
Well, right now we've never had our young people. Well, first of all, I am always thankful and in awe of our young people, and not even all our people. Any person who puts our uniform on and does the things that we do, because we ask a lot of our people, especially in the pandemic.
Yeah.
Asking to enforce policies that come from the government that they may or may not agree with, like all the things that we've had to go through in this last year, and on top of an opioid crisis, and the like all the things that are going on in the world, under the most scrutiny that our industry's ever been under with public opinion. It's absolutely phenomenal to me that we have such a dedicated group of people that I'm fortunate enough to be a part of.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about like why empathy is so important in the role for security.
We need to make sure that we're treating everybody, and it's strange to me that we have to have the conversation, but we need to make sure we're treating people like humans. It could have been my dad, could have been whoever.
Mm-hmm.
And very few people choose to be in situations that they're in. Some of it's side effects of most of it is side effects of unchecked mental illness and addiction. Which one came first is sometimes debatable, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's incumbent on us to make sure that we approach people and that we try to see things from their point of view, and try to ensure that we're doing our job. We still have to do our job. We still have a line that we have to hold to some degree, but we don't have to be cruel. We don't have to be inhumane in that action.
Yeah.
And I would, it happens on occasion. There are people who make mistakes. We all do, but I think it's critical to the future of our industry, and just for me personally, that I know that if somebody comes to our building, no matter who they are, what socioeconomic background they come from, whatever race or whatever they are, they can come and our staff can be relied on, and our agents can be relied on to be fair, to be kind, and to treat them with the respect that everybody in our country should be treated with.
It seems so simple, right?
Right.
Ultimately.
Right. I've often said that it seems strange that we won an award for just trying to treat people like people.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that the industry has been historically a little bit more heavy-handed in some ways.
Mm.
And unfortunately, that still exists in a lot of our industry, which is problematic. But I think over time, with getting in and having these discussions and moving through the training pieces and helping people understand the whys behind mental health and the addictions issues and some of the support issues that come depending which province you're in, it varies pretty vastly as to how much support there are for various things. Understanding those whys and just really understanding like how people get hurt, how the addiction cycle works, and that point, that part of this job is we can have an impact.
Yeah.
Like we have people every day dealing with, disadvantaged people, marginalized people, high-risk lifestyles, people who may or may not want help in some cases, but it's incumbent on us to try and take care of, the most vulnerable of our society. I think we have a obligation, whether you're being paid to do it or not, to compassionately take care of everyone in our society.
For sure. Now, I do want to touch on another topic that you spoke about, leading in uncertain times. Why is this important? Why is this topic important to you?
I don't think times have ever been more uncertain.
Yes, so, it's true.
I think that, so having struggled with the effects of my military career for the year following my military career and going through my own challenges with, the mental health side, things like that. But knowing that when I was in those difficult times, that negativity breeds negativity. And it's there are very few forces as powerful as negativity and as easy to adopt, I should say.
Yeah.
Positivity is harder to adopt than negativity. And I've seen it on teams where you get one negative person and the whole team goes down.
Right.
And for those who haven't seen the video, who may be listening, was on a particularly difficult operation and food was bad. The direction was weird because we had a weird chain of command.
Yeah.
It was pretty miserable conditions overall. And then we had our kind of what became our mascot and started doing some stuff to cope with that. And it became really important to me throughout my military career to make sure that when things were bad, to not be that guy, like not be the guy who's in the corner complaining about everything that's going on, because every corporation, every military, every operation, every site has stuff, things that aren't great, things that don't go your way, things that make the conditions tougher. All of those things exist. It's just how you choose to perceive it is ultimately what is going to lead to the success or failure of the mission, the site, whatever the case is. And I sometimes feel that, and I felt this way when I was a young person, that you don't feel like you have the opportunity to impact things. But once we started to bring in the levity and to do those things and find those positive coping mechanisms to move forward, it changed. And that tour ended up being a turning point in my life, but B, it ended up being fun. And there's a lot of real fond memories I have of that period of time where I could have just spent 8 months miserable and commiserating and arguing. And I think we're there right now. There's never been in my lifetime, I've never seen any times quite as tough as what we're going through. Our staff are not just our staff, they're, our agents are people, and they're struggling with lockdowns and the rules changing and different mandates that may or may not come. There's struggles with all these things, and they're struggling as people. And if you've got to go to work and deal with negativity and all the things on top of that, makes things tough and untenable at times. And we don't want to be there. So I just always say, like, you don't have to lead, you don't have to be the on paper leader to lead. And that's a part that I think gets missed sometimes. You can lead from any position.
That's such a good point. Yeah. I didn't think about it that way.
Yeah. Because you can lead from any position. Like it was just a bunch of privates and corporals that started this thing, and it ended up turning into a bit of a game between us and our sergeant, and it improved his morale because we were trying to hide Bo from the sergeant. And it was sort of, so it became this thing. So you can lead from anywhere. Leadership is not necessarily something that is granted to you through your position. You can choose to lead. You can, especially when it comes to challenging times, you can choose that. And I think that's an important point for people to see, is that even if you're the very bottom of the ladder, you can still lead your team. You can still lead through the example of not giving in to the commiseration, the finding the things that are wrong. Because if you look hard enough, you'll find them. They're everywhere. So, but I think that people, I hope that people can understand that they have a real opportunity to impact, no matter where you sit in the chain of command.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how much does it make a difference in one's life or career when they just shift their mindset just like a little bit?
For me, it was huge. Like from that point on, it changed my career path. And I ended up, career-wise, I moved through the ranks very, very quickly because, a friend of mine likened it to, you got to kind of light your bonfire and people come to your bonfire. People are attracted to people who are positive and put out and have the energy and try to do those kinds of things. And I found that in my military career, I ended up moving through the ranks way quicker because, I would volunteer for things that no one else wanted to do. Mm-hmm. I would try to maintain a good, maintain my sense of humor and all that kind of stuff. When things were down, that gets noticed. So through that process, you get benefit from it, but I guess it'd be more side effects than benefits because it's just a side effect of how you're deciding to perceive and to lead.
Yeah, for sure. What piece of advice, if you had to give one piece of advice to someone who maybe is starting out their career in security and is, uncertain about things or doesn't, really know, what they're, I don't want to say getting into, but just unsure about their future. What piece of advice would you want to give them?
I guess if I had to give one piece of advice for someone coming into this industry, it's to A, stay positive, as we've kind of already discussed, but B, ask a lot of questions. Pay attention to your surroundings. Do the basic stuff right. A lot of the other stuff will fall into place. You'll learn through asking questions. If you show up on time and if your uniform looks good and all those things, a lot of the other stuff will fall into place. And sometimes I think that there's people want to move quickly and they want to move up and make more money. We all do. It's a natural thing. But a lot of that starts with how you present yourself to the world, whether it's in your attitude or how you look or whatever the case is. That a lot of that starts there. So do the basics right. Because that's all the expectation is when you're starting, is do the basics right. Be engaged, be curious, ask questions. If you have leadership that's not impressed by your curiosity, in Edmonton, we've got 70 sites. So, if that site's not working for you, engage your chain of command and say that maybe you want to try something else. And that's okay. Any leader who's, and hopefully my organization, would be open to that. And we'd much rather have you find somewhere where you're engaged and happy and feel like your curiosity is being rewarded and all those things are happening is to talk. But I think being curious and doing the basics is the big one. Yeah. I had no specific plan to end up here, right? But I've had a very interesting career. I've got to do some amazing things all over the globe, and just out of kind of curiosity. Yeah.
It's true. It gets you a lot of places, I think. So, well, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. It was so great to just hear your experience and insight. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm quite honored I was able to do this. So thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to The Difference Makers. New episodes are released on the first Tuesday of every month.